Hey, welcome for clicking and dragging yourself all the way to daily strength. God didn't ask me to write the 10 Commandments, but if I had, I might have added an 11th one, and it would be something like this. Thou shalt not be a bystander. Let's talk about it. In Psalm 146:7, we read that God upholds the cause of the oppressed. You may remember that way back in 1955, an African-American Christian woman in her 40s refused to surrender her seat to a white man on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. As a result, many now view Rosa Parks as the mother of the civil rights movement and consider her act one of great courage. But Rosa called her decision an act of faith. She said, "I felt the Lord would give me strength to endure whatever I had to face. It was time for someone to stand up, or in my case," she said, to sit down, and I refused to move. As followers of Jesus, we must be willing to stand or sit for whatever is right and just. Sadly, when life is good inside the believer's bubble, very few of our voices cry out in protest against injustice. Take a glance back through history with me for just a moment. Do you remember the Christians who lived in ancient Rome? They were tortured and killed for entertainment in the coliseums of Rome. Centuries later, generations of Africans were forced into slavery and kept in bondage until they were legally set free in 1865. And today, the atrocities in places like Darfur have resulted in the killing and maiming of hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. You know, I have to tell you that something should go tilt down deep inside us when we think about these detestable actions against the dignity of fellow humans. And if it doesn't, we need to check our spiritual pulse. And as our text today tells us, God hates injustice and has a special place in his heart for the oppressed. As our text today tells us, he upholds the cause of the oppressed. So it moves me to think about how his heart must break when he sees people who are precious to him victimized by corrupt thinking and twisted morality. God hates injustice so much that he gave us a living model for raising the standard of justice against oppression. That model is Jesus Christ himself. Take, for instance, the time when he cleaned house in the temple, where the merchants and money changers were in cahoots. They were requiring poor pilgrims who had come to worship to change their money for temple currency at exorbitantly unjust rates. And on top of that, these pilgrims had to pay several times the market value for a cow, a lamb, or a dove that was to be used as an atonement for their sin. Obviously, Jesus despised this unjust practice so much that he used a whip to drive the money changers from the temple, overthrowing their money tables and calling them thieves. He reacted so strongly because the merchants were taking advantage of the people's desire to serve and obey God. I'll tell you this. Injustice in the name of a just God is a really serious offense to our God, who is perfectly just. In fact, throughout the Gospels, Jesus took it upon himself at great risk to be an advocate for the maligned and the oppressed. One of history's most tragic offenses to justice was the Holocaust. In Washington, D.C., at the Holocaust Museum, there is a plaque with these words, "Thou shalt not be a victim. Thou shalt not be a perpetrator. Above all, thou shalt not be a bystander." Although the silence from the Christian community can often be deafening when it comes to helping the oppressed, it's never too late to start. You and I need to link arms with the people who are taking justice to our unjust world by rescuing those who are victims of injustice. The Old Testament prophet Micah mentioned that when it comes to pleasing God, we must act justly and love mercy. Maybe that's why I'd love to see the 11th commandment be, "Thou shalt not be a bystander."